We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired. 4:15 ASF. Route 91 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter
with mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Now to across the Sierra in Nevada tonight, a math teacher being hailed as a hero and mourned.
That teacher was killed today during a shooting rampage. It happened at a middle school in Sparks. KCRA 3's David Bieniek live for us in Sparks, where the big question still tonight is why, David?
Exactly, Galston. Well, police here in Sparks say that it looks as if the two students who were wounded in today's school shooting will survive, but they say the student who they believe is responsible will not. He took his own life.
The scariest reality that we face as a human race are the everyday reports of active shooters. Even more alarming are the increase in school shootings. Access to violent video games, social media, and misinformation are abundant in today's society. With the popularity of virtual reality games comes the inability to distinguish fantasy from real life. Active school shooters are even more unique, as they are virtually all committed by children. Today's shooter is one of the youngest school shooters in known history, only older than the youngest by a year. The Jonesboro West Side Middle School shooter that we covered in episode 46 was only 11 years old when he committed the deadly act. The very stark difference between the two is that the Jonesboro shooter was caught and tried and convicted. He is now free, having served his sentence, while today's shooter ended his day of terror, as so many shooters do, by taking his own life, in the end, and leaving more questions than answers.
Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the no notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge in not naming the shooter by their actual name. In today's episode, we will refer to the shooter
as Neil. The morning of October 21st, 2013, seemed like most others to Neil's parents. The outward facade was that of a typical family home. However, as we all know, appearances can be deceiving, and what may have seemed normal to the uninterested eye can be far from reality in which one lives. Just before 6 a.m., his dad entered Neil's room to say goodbye before leaving for work. The father and son told each other that they loved one another before Dad left for the day. Neil rose from bed and walked over to his parents' room, where his mother was still laying in bed. Neil hopped into the bed and with a serious face informed her that he needed to take his BB gun to school. Science class, more specifically. His mother told him that he'd have to show her a note from the science teacher, saying that he had permission to do such before she would allow it. They both got up and began to get ready for their respective days. Neil's mom laid out clothes for him, a freshly ironed gray shirt. Neil's mom laid out clothes for him, a freshly ironed gray school sweatshirt and khaki slacks. Sometime between greeting his father and leaving for the day, the precise time is unknown, 12-year-old Neil collected his Ruger SR9C 9mm semi-automatic handgun, or rather, his father's handgun, from its hiding place in the kitchen. The gun was kept in a cabinet over the refrigerator. You know the one. Those small cabinets that never seem large enough to hold anything, yet house all sorts of random kitchen items that you want kept out of the way. The cabinet was camouflaged by several cereal boxes, stacked one by one next to each other. Neil took his father's gun from the cabinet in the kitchen and placed it into his orange backpack. Mother and son left the house so she could drop him at the Sparks Middle School, where the 7th grader was a student. Neil was dropped off, and as soon as his mom drove away, he walked over to the basketball court and slowly pulled the firearm out of his bag and opened fire.
He pulls out a gun and shoots my friend.
The sound of the gunshot cut through the noise that is typical of the pandemonium of the beginning of any school day. Teachers and students alike began to run for their lives. Some even jumped over the fences that surrounded the school's property. About 20 to 30 middle school-aged children witnessed the inexplicable violence unfolding on their playground. A vision they can never be able to understand, yet have to live with every single day. School principal Stacy Cooper attempted to broadcast a code red, but the intercom system wasn't working properly, which unfortunately was a terribly common occurrence. Principal Cooper was aware of Neil. He had a prior heated outburst that she knew of, though she was completely unaware of any bullying. She was shocked this was happening. One student was outside playing catch when he heard a loud popping noise. He turned in time to see Neil pointing a gun at Mr. Lansbury, when suddenly the teacher fell to the ground. The horror of what this child witnessed is incomprehensible.
Did you come face to face with him? Did he say anything to you? He just shot you. How far away from you was he?
About 10, 20 feet.
And did you realize right away that you had been shot? Did you know you knew it?
Yeah, there was a very sharp pain in my stomach.
Was Mr. Lansbury one of your teachers?
No, he was just a really good friend of mine because I used to go visit him every time at lunch and before school.
Why'd you like him so much?
Because he was funny and friendly and fun to hang around.
When you came to him, was everyone else running when you tried to go to him when he was on
No,
the ground?
the first shot was my friend, and then Mr. Lansbury got shot. And then I was looking around my school and I'm like, why is everybody running from nothing? And then I'm like, oh wow, then I saw Mr. Lansbury got shot. He was laying on the ground, and I ran over, and a couple of JJ's friends like, we need to get him into the school. And so we tried, then one of my vice principals, Mr. Andres, said that get in the building, get in the school fast. And then that's when I ran to my backpack and I got shot.
Did you know the boy who was doing the shooting?
At about the same time, Vice Principal Jim Andres arrived at the school and saw his colleague, Mr. Lansbury, lying on the ground. He wasn't moving and appeared to be deceased. Approximately 60 feet away, he noticed Neil, arm raised with a gun pointed and ready to shoot. Mr. Andres began to run. As fast as his legs would carry him, he ran so fast that he tripped over his own feet and fell. He hid behind a large planter while he tried to gather himself enough to continue on, which he did. Mr. Andres also tried to issue a code red, yet the intercom still wasn't working properly, so he continued on to the school cafeteria where a group of students was fearfully huddled. Mr. Andres and the students began to stack garbage cans, and frankly whatever else they could find that might help create a barrier. Another witness, a teacher, wrote in their police statement that they heard a loud pop, and initially thinking it was a firecracker, they turned to look, and saw Mr. Lansbury, who was falling to the basketball court floor.
Active shooter, Sparks Middle School, 2275 18th Street.
The first 911 call was placed at 7:16 a.m. and reported an active shooter at Sparks Middle School.
911 emergency. I'm calling from Sparks Middle School. We have a shooting at our school.
This is a student from Sparks Middle School. Can you please send police out here? There's a kid with a gun.
911 emergency.
Somebody brought a gun to school that shot its teacher.
The teacher's down?
Yes.
Police and paramedics were immediately dispatched and arrived at a scene of complete chaos. While the loss of life and injuries were mercifully kept to a minimum, the schoolyard was a frenzy of first responders and terrified students and teachers. 45-year-old math teacher Mr. Lansbury, Michael, was discovered on the basketball court. He wasn't moving, but his eyes were open. The responding paramedic cut open his shirt, where he instantly saw the bullet protruding. Michael Lansbury was declared dead on the scene. 2 students, Kaylin Guerrero and Mason Davis, were seriously injured, though each survived. 12-year-old Mason was shot in the abdomen while he was waiting for the first period to begin outside the school. Standing near the south entrance doors, he heard a loud noise that Mason thought was a car backfiring. He suddenly saw that Mr. Lansbury got shot, and this brave young man began walking towards the teacher, thinking somehow he could help. As Mason was heading away from the school, Mr. Andres ran by and started to shout at Mason to run. Without hesitation, Mason began running, when out of the corner of his eye he saw Neil standing about 10 to 20 feet away. Mason begged Neil not to shoot him, and continued running. As he was running, he felt a sharp pain, and knew he was shot.
So, when you saw it was him, with the gun, shooting you, what were you thinking?
Before I got shot, I'm like, please don't shoot me, please don't shoot me. And I looked at him and I saw it and he braced it and he shot me in my stomach.
And he didn't say anything to you?
He didn't say anything. I'm like, please don't shoot me, please don't shoot me. And then he raised and boom, shot me.
But here's someone you say was a friend, someone you say you would have stuck up for if you saw him getting bullied, and yet this is the same boy that shot you. What did you think of that?
After he shot me, I thought that he wasn't my real friend.
Mason encountered a security guard who helped him lie down and apply pressure to the wound. Lying there, probably wondering if he was going to die, Mason must have been frantic. He was friends with Neil. Why would his friend do this? Neil wasn't really ever bullied, although if others ever teased him, Mason was the first one to stick up for his friend. Now, here he was, shot with a bullet that entered his abdomen, just below the belly button, and because of the position he was in, the bullet exited and re-entered his stomach before finally exiting through his right buttock. 12-year-old Kaylin Guerrero was dropped off at school by bus at approximately 7:05 a.m., and he met up with 2 of his friends straight away. He noticed Neil pacing back and forth when he unexpectedly stopped and pulled a gun from his orange backpack. The boys stopped in their tracks. When Neil pointed the gun their way, he aimed at one of Kaylin's friends, but without warning, fired at Kaylin, who was shot in the left shoulder. The bullet entered but lodged in his back, touching the spine. He didn't stand a chance of moving out of the way or escaping. He didn't stand a chance of moving out of the way or escaping getting shot, yet he still managed to walk to the North Hall, where a teacher helped him into an awaiting ambulance. We know Kalen survived, but it is not known if the bullet was able to be extracted. Mr. Lansbury was heroic that day, and he very likely saved countless lives. By approaching the shooter, rather than running for safety, he allowed many others time to flee. Neil didn't know Mr. Lansbury, but he did know the two students he shot. One very well, as previously discussed.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter, mass casualty incidents.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter, mass casualty incidents.
Several other students later reported that Neil pointed his gun at a group of kids while saying, quote, "You ruined my life, so now I'm going to ruin yours." He then left and walked towards the basketball court. Just before he shot and killed Mr. Lansbury, Neil could be heard saying to him, quote, "Don't make me do this." And then he pulled the trigger, killing the innocent man instantly. Meanwhile, back at home, Neil's mother barely made it back in the door before her phone rang. Her sister was calling to say she wasn't able to drop her daughter off at school, which was strange to Neil's mom because she had only just dropped her son off at the exact same school. Her sister continued by saying that the school was surrounded by police due to reports of an armed person. She indicated that she tried to contact her nephew to see what was happening inside the school, but he didn't answer. The women hung up with each other, and Neil's mom immediately called her husband. She was worried and wanted Neil's dad to go to the school and see what he could find out. Equally concerned, Neil's dad drove straight to the school, but wasn't able to locate his son. Back at the house, Neil's mom's unease rapidly grew into downright fear and anxiety when she noticed the cereal boxes had been moved. They no longer concealed the cabinet doors that hid her husband's firearm. Upon checking, her worst fears were likely confirmed when it became apparent that the gun was gone. There was only one place it would have gone to, and it wasn't to work with her husband. She hurriedly called her husband back and informed him of the grave news. He was still at the school, and this time he tried to gain entry through the front doors, telling officials that he believed his son may be involved as the shooter. Students, faculty, and their families were taken to the nearby Agnes Risley Elementary School, which had been established as a reunification center. The police response was swift, and it appears that the shooter was deceased by the time the police arrived, or very shortly afterward. 45-year-old Michael Lansbury was born on January 20th, 1968. Before his teaching career, Michael was a technical sergeant with the Nevada National Guard as a part of the 152nd Logistics Readiness Squadron. He enlisted in the Marines in 1986 and achieved the rank of corporal before eventually joining the National Guard and serving 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. Michael earned a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Nevada, Reno in 2001. He went on to marry the love of his life, Sharon, and she provided him with 2 stepdaughters he loved like his own, and they loved him too. In fact, Michael's career and service even inspired one of his stepdaughters to serve her country. She graduated from Navy recruit training only 4 days after the shooting that took her beloved stepfather. Sharon and Michael celebrated their 5-year wedding anniversary shortly before the shooting, and the loss of this incredible man is still deeply felt by all. He died in an effort to protect the students who were so endeared to him. Michael was a fine math teacher who treasured his role in expanding young minds, especially in the subject that frustrated so many students. His kids called him Mr. L, although many called him by the nickname Batman, mostly based on Michael's passion for all things Batman. In 2014, Michael was posthumously honored with the Nevada Teacher of the Year Award, and a crowd of over 1,000 gathered to celebrate the teacher, and man, so many revered. After the shooting, a Sparks Sting concert and car show was held, and it raised substantial funds for the family and other shooting victims. Michael's wife, Sharon, wants all to know that her darling husband absolutely adored his country, students, and family. Michael will never, ever be forgotten. 12-year-old Neil was born on July 2nd, 2001. He came into the world after 8 hours of labor weighing 7 pounds and 10 ounces. He was born with an umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, which nearly caused him to die at birth. He survived the birthing ordeal and was eventually sent home with his doting parents, who quickly learned that life with a newborn meant sleepless nights while the baby slept much of the day. Neil's mother claims that he was already smiling at just 1 week old, and he was affectionately named after his father. His parents met at a dance, and afterward they went to a pizza joint, where they ultimately exchanged telephone numbers. From there, they were a couple who had a ton in common, mainly the fact that they each came from immigrant families from Mexico and made their way to Nevada, searching for the American dream. The couple married in 2000, when she was 21 and he was 19. Only months after tying the knot, they learned they were expecting. After Neil was born in 2001, they had 2 additional children, both girls, born in 2005 and 2006 respectively. Neil's dad was a hard worker, starting out in the restaurant business as a busser and eventually working his way to cook. The family of 5 wasn't well off, but they were close. Neil's dad had a job opportunity in Arizona, and the family moved there for a time until the economy really started to slow down. In 2008, they moved back to Nevada, where Neil's uncle, his father's brother, owned a restaurant and offered his brother a job. The family worked hard and saved nearly every penny until they were finally able to realize their own dream of opening a restaurant called Sparks Coffee Shop, which was open for breakfast and lunch. The place was very popular, and they began to do well, though they maintained their hard-working spirit. For his part, Neil didn't speak in full sentences until he was 5 years old, and began formal school. The family primarily spoke Spanish at home, but English was the spoken language at school, which could have been partially to blame for the delay in his speech development. While in kindergarten, at the Agnes Risley Elementary School, Neil was referred for speech therapy, and from there, he seemed to genuinely struggle in school. During 6th grade, Neil was performing at a 1st grade level in math and a 2nd grade level in reading. This is aside from the behavioral and social problems that Neil was experiencing. The fact that he was even able to move on to middle school is a bit surprising. Despite his numerous challenges, Neil's mom reports that he was typically a very pleasant boy who always wore a smile on his face. Despite what his mother saw, Neil did struggle, though. He had a difficult time making friends and floundered in reading social situations. Mason, the friend that Neil shot, said that Neil often provoked arguments with others that he disagreed with, and if he saw the other kids laughing, he instantly assumed they were laughing at his expense, which made Neil irate.
What kind of person was he?
He was nice. But I think he had some mental issues in his head.
Why'd you think that?
Because he argues with people a lot. I see him being argumentative with teachers and students. And that's why I think he is a little mental up in the head. So, yeah.
Did he have friends? Did you see him with friends?
I had seen him with friends. And I don't think he was being bullied at all.
Oh, really? You don't think he was being bullied?
Because if he was being bullied and I saw it, I would have stuck up for him. I was one of his friends.
His inability to communicate adequately with others presented so many obstacles for Neil and when or if teachers or adults attempted to correct him in front of others, Neil shut down and couldn't handle it. Indeed, an Individual Education Plan, or IEP, dated January 17, 2013, stated that Neil will, quote, become frustrated when things go too fast, change in schedule, or his daily routines. It is hard for him to accept a poor grade on assignments, and it can take him a half an hour to an hour for him to calm down. There were many variations in how others described Neil. Some said he was in his own world, while one teacher said he had, quote, a tendency to laugh, giggle, and make little noises to himself in class. While others say Neil often engaged in strange behavior, disconnecting from the world around him. Yet, still, others would say that he acted confused and said things that made no sense. By all accounts, Neil's emotions were, at best, unstable, and he was known to lose his temper easily. It is believed that Neil was in the 2nd grade when his issues really began presenting themselves. Or perhaps it's when the issues became impossible to ignore or write off as typical child behavior. Neil was known to break down emotionally, crying uncontrollably to the point the teacher would have to take him on a walk to calm him down. One teacher who had Neil in elementary school said that the other children in the class truly cared for Neil and wouldn't let other students pick on or tease him. The problem was, once Neil got worked up, it was incredibly difficult to placate him. There was one instance where another student was teasing Neil for reading a remedial book, and he became so enraged at the perceived taunting that he grabbed a chair and threw it against the wall. That incident prompted a special education teacher to recommend that Neil be placed in a life skills class, although the recommendation was later denied by the program manager. 3 days before the shooting, Neil was prescribed a generic form of Prozac. When he seemed to have a quick temper, there were no reports that Neil was ever involved in a physical altercation. In 2011, when he was about 10, Neil began working around his father's restaurant, spending school breaks, weekends, and even some weeknights doing various jobs like washing dishes, greeting customers, and bussing tables. In school, he did very well, especially when he just focused on schoolwork. He won numerous student awards going back as early as kindergarten, and his parents were incredibly proud of their son's achievements. It was reported that the family was on the quiet side, though the children were very well behaved and polite. As we mentioned before, though, what we see on the outside isn't always a true depiction of what's going on inside. There were troubles within the home. In January of 2012, Neil's dad pled guilty to misdemeanor child abuse after he struck Neil during an argument, leaving the young boy with a black eye. The son and father were bickering after returning home from purchasing some video games. Neil was struggling with counting his money and became agitated when his father tried to assist. The quarrel escalated to the point where Neil was struck in the face, though initially Neil tried to claim that he hit his father first. But Dad was the one who actually reported the incident to a school counselor the following day. He was charged with felony child abuse, but was ultimately only convicted of the misdemeanor when he pled guilty to child abuse, endangerment, or neglect in Sparks Justice Court. He was ordered to pay a $500 fine and attend anger management and parenting classes. Neil's dad reported feeling sick over what happened, and he had no criminal history prior to this incident. There were no other reports of abuse in the home, and the police ultimately did not link the shooting back to this incident. During the eventual investigation after the shooting, Neil's parents told police that they never knew their son felt a certain type of way about his classmates, or felt bullied. He never acted angry or upset, and never talked about any specific kids or teachers being mean. They knew he was teased a little over his speech impediment, but he was working on overcoming that, and they never thought the slight razzing over it would escalate to this horrific response.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
active shooter, mass casualty incidents.
active shooter. Reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
Some reports indicate that Neil easily resorted to tears and could be very sensitive. Many say that Neil's dad changed a lot after opening his restaurant, which could have been due to the stress of having a family to support while trying to run a successful business. Either way, he seemed to yell more and became irate much easier. Neil once reported to a teacher that his dad was pretty hard on him, at least when he was working at the restaurant. Other family members believed Neil's dad was becoming violent, but towards his wife. They also thought Neil had perhaps witnessed some of the outbursts towards his mom. When police investigated after the shooting, it was clear that Neil's mother was avoiding questions related to domestic violence in the home. When police investigated after the shooting, it was clear that Neil's mother was avoiding questions related to domestic violence in the home. Other family members reported to police that they were told that Neil's dad once held a gun to his wife's head, though it seems the incident was never disclosed outside of the family, and no one knows whether Neil saw the alleged conflict. There were also rumors that Neil's dad had an affair with a waitress at the restaurant, and had even moved to the Double Diamond area of Reno with her for a period of time, cutting off all communication with his children the entire time he was away. Neil's mom wanted to file for divorce as a result. A friend even helped her begin the process. The friend says she claimed she was in fear from her husband. He had a gun, and she thought he might use it. However, the couple eventually reconciled, and he returned back home. A cousin informed police that he'd seen Neil's dad slap him numerous times when Neil did something wrong at the restaurant. Similar to many of the other shooters we've covered, Neil aspired to join the military, and even collected military garb and helmets, and had amassed an impressive 27 different military magazines. He played many video games, most of which were violent games. Indeed, 69 different video games were located in his home after the shooting. Of the 69 games, 47 were first-person shooters. His computer search history was reviewed, and Neil had done many online searches including the terms bullying, murder, revenge, and school shooting. He also searched for a video game called Super Columbine Massacre. What seems slightly confusing is that while there are reports that Neil wasn't bullied and there were no issues at school, at least not reported by his parents, there is evidence that in the 4th grade, Neil's mother asked the school for help with her son. The 4th grade teacher indicated that Neil was diagnosed on the autism spectrum, but describes him as, quote, always smiling, always willing to help, and very quiet. Instead of playing at recess with the other children, Neil preferred to participate in imaginary play. By all accounts, the family was supportive of this diagnosis at first and did what was necessary to help Neil flourish. However, there remained a barrier with other students because Neil was unable to communicate effectively. Yet Neil's parents also indicated that he did inform them of some issues he was having at school, but never fully elaborated. Neil's mom told him he needed to report the issues to a teacher, but she was unaware whether he actually did or not. It's difficult to know what was really going on with there being such conflicting stories. During the fall break at school, Neil apparently told his mom that everything was fine, and no one was bothering him anymore. However, on October 18th, he advised a psychologist that he was still experiencing troubles, which is when he was placed on medication. As we know, the medication would never get a chance to work, if it even could, because the shooting occurred only 3 days later. After that same therapy session, the psychologist recommended that Neil's parents go to the school to request that Neil be placed in special classes to aid in his communication issues. After that same therapy session, the psychologist recommended that Neil's parents go to the school to request that Neil be placed in special classes to aid in his communication issues. The parents agreed and intended to visit the school the very first day back from the fall break. Again, as we are painfully aware, this meeting would never happen because the shooting came first. During the investigation, it was reported that one student had witnessed Neil have his pants pulled down in front of the other kids about 3 different times. The same student claimed that others would sometimes poke Neil in the sides, but no one ever told. Another incident reported later was a time inside the boys' locker room, when Neil was drinking from a water bottle, and another kid came along and knocked it right out of Neil's hand. Other kids laughed and teased Neil that he peed his pants, though it was obvious that he was only doused with water. Another child claimed that Kayleen Guerrero told Neil he didn't have any muscles during PE class. It may have been humiliating, but was it enough to propel this child into committing murder? It appears that Neil's folks were aware of his frequent video game playing. They must have been if they were purchasing the video games for him. They didn't seem to monitor his playing time or even what he was playing, nor did they check in on what he was searching for on the internet and his phone. They assert that they had no reason to believe that any of their children knew where the firearms were kept and maintain that their son had no intimate knowledge of firearms or weapons. He was never shown where they were, and he was never shown how to use them. They were stumped as to how he may have discovered the guns. In a twist much different from many of the shootings we have covered, it was later discovered that the shooter left 2 letters behind. One was written to his parents, and the other was addressed to the staff and student body at the elementary school. They were partly suicide letters, ones that offered feeble explanations and an awful lot of blame. The letter to his parents indicates that there was no reason for the shooting other than he, Neil, was bad. Yet the letter to the students and staff at the Sparks Middle School were riddled with blame and finger-pointing. It's truly devastating material for the survivors of the shooting to have to grapple with in the aftermath of such tragedy. There may be at least one influence behind Neil's decision to commit this horrifying act, albeit an influence that was intended to be a positive movement. An anti-bullying movie was shown at the middle school on September 13th, 2013. The video included scenes from the Columbine shooting, and in the documentary, a student that was bullied shoots another student. The shooter discusses wanting to go back in time to change his actions, choose another path. The reason this seems important is because Neil wrote in the letter to his parents about his great desire to go back in time and change his actions. Also in the movie, the student is portrayed by an actor who is shown on a school bus with a backpack. He arrives at school and walks through the building before slowly drawing the gun from the backpack and shooting a student, which is nearly exact to the movements Neil made. Another anti-bullying video was shown on October 11th, 2013, just before the fall break. The video showed 5 different stories of students being harassed at school. Stories that included a boy being picked on in PE class who hung himself, a female student that was bullied and brought a gun to school to scare and threaten other classmates, though no one was harmed in that clip, and yet another with a boy who was teased at school, stabbed with pencils, and punched and pushed around. The boy in that clip discussed the impact this had on him and his family. Each story in the videos was eerily similar to Neil's story in one way or another. Neil's family had just moved out of their apartment and into a new house on Friday, October 18th, only 3 days before the shooting. The new house was in a different school district, and Neil may eventually have to change schools, which he didn't want to do. This may have been another motive, although a strange one if bullying was truly an issue. A search of the new home uncovered a second gun and a BB gun. The gun was a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver and was found wrapped in a white towel and nestled in the same cabinet as the gun that Neil used. The BB gun was discovered inside of Neil's bedroom. As it turns out, a couple that frequented Neil's dad's restaurant gifted both the revolver and the murder weapon to him, knowing he was interested in firearms but unable to afford one.
What do you want people to learn from what you've been through?
I want people to learn from what I've been through is to, if you ever shot a gun and you accidentally killed somebody, you would have made a very big mistake from that. And I used to treat guns not poorly, but a little poorly because I thought they were a toy, but when I got shot, I learned that they're not just a toy. They're a weapon, and they could damage somebody very bad.
It is nearly impossible to say whether this shooting could have been prevented. It's easier to examine this shooting through a 2022 lens and see so many ways things went wrong, or perhaps where more could have been done. What we can say for sure is that mental health issues, a lack of parental supervision, and easy access to a weapon all played a role. We all have the unique ability to help prevent such a catastrophic event from happening. If we keep our eyes and ears open and never hesitate to report when something or someone just doesn't seem right. It is our sincerest wish that there will be no more active or mass shooting stories to tell. We pray that love will prevail over hate.
Too many have died! We should say to ourselves, not one more!
In the meantime, we urge our listeners to stay aware of your surroundings and keep in touch with your loved ones. If you see something, say something. You never know how many lives you'll be saving.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A huge thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the music used in this episode. Check him out at darrencurtismusic.com. DARRENCURTIS music.com.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter. Active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
Make sure to check us out on social media. We have a discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Active Shooter, the podcast discussion group. You can also find us on Instagram at Active the Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Active. For just $1 a month, you can get access to ad-free episodes, early release episodes when available, and a shout-out on the show. Just go to patreon.com/Active the Podcast. Thank you, and be safe.